Fable II is an action role-playing game developed by Lionhead Studios all the way back in 2008 and was released for the Xbox 360. The game is set in the fantasy world of Albion, some 500 years after the events of the first game, and follows the player character known only as Sparrow, who must unite three heroes together to face off against a madman who wants to destroy the world and, in the meantime, avenge the death of their sister. Fable II is the brainchild of Peter Molyneux, the creator of the Fable franchise, and he's a pretty interesting guy in of himself, especially when it comes to the way he sells his games by simply overselling them on promises that in no way represent the final product. But due to this, the Fable franchise did very well for Microsoft and became its flagship RPG on its systems. And it's a game that I have loved ever since I first pressed play all those years ago. With bringing back game reviews, I wanted to start off with something I really enjoyed, and this was not my original choice, but something brought me back to this game. This was one of my favorite games to play throughout my high school years, and it's one that has stuck with me. But I haven't played this in such a long time that I was curious if I still thought it was as great as I remember it all those years ago, and I could safely say yes. But I could see someone feeling the exact opposite, and I feel despite the love people have for this franchise, there are some outspoken fans that have criticized the games and Molyneux's strategy of straight up lying to his audience, and I'm not here to say this franchise and this game in particular are without flaw. That's just not the case. In fact, after playing it, there's a lot of things in the game I wish were done differently. But the experience overall is something I cherish, and it's easily one of my favorite games of all time. The world of Fable is such a unique setting compared to other fantasy worlds, and that's where a lot of the charm comes from. Albion is a funny place, and the humor is straight out of Monty Python. To give you an example, very early in the game, you have to collect these wanted posters for gold. And if you read these wanted posters, you really get the sense of humor the game is going for, with them saying things like, wanted for assault with a deadly weapon, assault with a potentially deadly weapon, assault with a weapon we can't believe could possibly be deadly, but unfortunately was. This is just one example. I also don't know many other games that will give you emotes to fart, stick your tongue out at people, dance, and make fun of people. Fable 2 gives you these options and paints a very different world from what you're used to. It's a fun world to be in. And that humor is matched well with its darker storyline that takes you through these three distinct time periods, but I would argue there's really only two. The story manages to balance lighthearted moments with some darker elements, and Fable 2 ends up feeling more like a children's fairy tale than anything else, and that's probably my favorite aspect of the game. If you were to look at Fable 2, it looks like a child's RPG. You have this bright, colorful world, exaggerated character design. It's cartoony, and the story is a pretty straightforward good versus evil revenge story. It's not a very complex game story-wise, but it manages to invest you not with the best story ever or the most compelling characters, but with relatable themes and archetypes that you can easily identify with. I love how innocently the game starts out with you doing menial tasks as a pauper on the streets, and you and your sister have big dreams of escaping the life you've been dealt for something more meaningful and happy. The tutorial for this game sets up the world, characters, and the theme so well right from the moment a bird dropping literally falls on Sparrow's head, symbolizing good luck, and from that moment, fate has chosen you to be the hero of the story, and I think that's great. The game paints a fairy tale beginning of a rags to riches story that ultimately ends with the father figure who, in a typical fairy tale, may whisk these children away from their old lives and instead tries to kill them both for his own benefit. It's perfectly executed and has always stuck out in my mind as a good hook to bring you into the world. The rest of the game has you traveling the breadth of Albion in search of heroes to combat the main villain, Lucian, who is rebuilding an ancient construct to make a singular wish to destroy the world. It's kind of here that the narrative does falter. Lucian is a very one-note villain. There's nothing too complex about him, but through reading his journals, which I might add are not mandatory for understanding the game, but do provide some good context, you get a better understanding of his wants and desires. Death of his wife and child sent him into a depressive state that ultimately leads him to wanting to reshape the world. I wish this was in the forefront more, as it could have added to his character a whole lot more and make him a bit more tragic in the end. I do like that they show the comparisons between Lucian's wants and Sparrow and his sister Rose's at the beginning of the game. Their wish is to find peace and happiness, while Lucian's is all about destruction, and fate plays heavy in guiding Sparrow and Rose to his castle so that the events can happen for Lucian's eventual downfall. It's not very complex, but it doesn't need to be. It provides us with easily definable archetypes, and I think the game still ends up working. I think the game does fail its side characters, though. The other heroes you collect along your journey lack much of attention to detail that you might presume, seeing as how important they are to the story, but you never really get a sense of their bond as a team, and they really don't spend that much time together. Hammer is a simple do-gooder that is strong and starts off as a pacifist monk who, after witnessing the death of her father at the hands of Lucian's men, decides to take up a hammer and join the hero. Garth once worked for Lucian and has knowledge of the enemy, but he ultimately falls pretty flat as a character. And then you have Reaver, who is by far the most interesting of the heroes, and it's a shame he's in so little of the game, because he is not a good guy, and that's what makes him so great. He's an idealist, only in it for himself, and is only there because of circumstance, not because he wants to. And once you beat the game, he seems relieved that he can get back to what he was doing, caring very little for the state of the world. And that's so intriguing to me and flips this story on its head a bit, because you assume everyone would be on the same page. That's simply not the case. I should probably touch a bit on the gameplay side of things, and I would call it unremarkable, but solid enough. I'm not the type of person to complain about combat being janky and awkward. I can easily enjoy a game with problems to gameplay, and Fable II's gameplay is completely serviceable with 3 modes of play, which includes swordplay, ranged attacks, and magic. And you have to use everything at your disposal. I've never been very good at mastering this game's combat. It is clunky, and everyone just takes forever to kill, even with some very powerful weapons, and I always end up dying. But I don't really care too much about it. I'm okay with it, but can see others being more unforgiving towards it. It's simply serviceable. The game also gives you a dog companion that will help you in finding treasure chests and dig spots, and they really do a good job of having you form this bond with this dog, and when the narrative eventually separates you and you're finally reunited, it's so satisfying. As the game goes along, you'll also have access to side quests, jobs, a pretty simple dating system, and these are nice diversions, and in particular, some of the side quests shine quite a bit. There's one that I always remember where a ghost has you break someone that loved them's heart, and then they end their own life and haunt that ghost. There's a lot of humor in these moments, and it makes the side content worth investing in. Props also has to go to Danny Elfman and Russell Shaw's score, which is beautiful, whimsical, and is so fitting for the mood of this game. The main theme that starts the game is one I particularly love that just gives you the feeling right off the bat that something very important is about to happen. The art design, as mentioned briefly, is also really good. I love the exaggerated cartoony designs of the world and the characters, and it makes me wish the game had actual cutscenes to make you appreciate them all the more. Fable 2 decides to forego cutscenes, and instead all the conversations happen in-game, and it makes things feel pretty impersonal. You do have moments where you can zoom in on particular scenes, but sometimes I was baffled by the composition of the images, and the angles they decided to go with just didn't look right. Going back to the narrative though, I love a good story that involves very distinct time jumps. One of my favorite video game series, Fire Emblem, does this a lot, and Fable 2 does the same, starting you out as a child before pushing you to adulthood. And that's fun at the start, seeing how the world around you has changed since childhood, especially when you get to the main city of the game, Bowerstone, which has grown up vastly from the start. There is a second time skip later on in the game when Sparrow has to infiltrate the Tattered Spire and is gone for 10 years, and you don't really feel the weight of that time change, and I found that not much really changes aside for some characters growing older. I feel like it was a missed opportunity to do something very interesting with time. Lastly, though, I want to touch on the climax of this game, which feels rushed at points and I think still manages to be emotionally satisfying. We get a great scene between Sparrow and Lucian with some really great dialogue from Lucian. The line,
"The last time I killed you, it tore my heart out. Of course, you were only a child. But then, so was I,"
is one that has really stuck with me through the years, and his final speech before you decide to kill him, or if you don't, Reaver will, is such a fun moment of decision making. I love that the game gives you the choice to kill the villain in the middle of his villainous speech, or see it till the end. Sure, you don't get the epic boss fight, but thematically, this moment is so much richer no matter the decision you make. And the decisions you make at the endgame really paint a fun picture of the motivations of the main character and who you've decided to be throughout your playthrough. I've played this game so many times, I have done all three, but the love path will always be my favorite. Selfless is the more heroic choice, but I think the path of love speaks more to the game's themes and completes the emotional arc of the story. Fable 2 is a flawed game for sure. Some of the problems it has are even more apparent all these years later, but ultimately it doesn't matter for me. They're quirks that I admire rather than despise. The game is lacking in a polished combat system and characters, but it provides a world worth just having fun in. The humor is really funny, and the themes are explored in a very resonant way that I never feel like my time was wasted. I always end my playthroughs of this game with a smile and feeling enriched by a game that doesn't take itself too seriously, but when it works, it really does work. That's not going to speak to everyone, but it sure does speak to me, and ultimately, that's all that matters. So, with all that said, I'm gonna give Fable 2 a 10 out of 10. Sure, I'm a bit biased when it comes to this game, but I think it's fine to be biased about the things we love. I could play this game anytime I want and never get bored of it, and to me, that's the sign of a really good game, flaws and all. But what do you think of Fable 2? Are you like me and still think it holds up despite its apparent shortcomings, or do those shortcomings get in the way? I'm very interested to replay the third game at some point, which is everyone's least favorite, but I remember still having a good time with it, and I do want to play Fable 1 sometime because I've actually never completed that game. But thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to doing more video game reviews like this in the future. But as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.